In the pantheon of automotive history, there is a specific category of vehicle that transcends mere transportation and enters the realm of mythology. We are accustomed to the mass-produced icons, the Mustangs, the Camaros, the Corvettes that populate every car show in America. But beneath the surface of high-volume production runs, there exists a shadow world of factory specials. These are the ghosts, the machines built in secret, engineered with a singular, violent purpose, and produced in numbers so low that seeing one in the wild is statistically harder than being struck by lightning.
We often romanticize the muscle car era as a time of excess, of bright colors and loud exhausts available to anyone with a few $1,000s. But the true cutting edge of that era wasn't found on the showroom floor, it was found in the back doors of engineering departments, hidden under option codes that the average salesman didn't even know existed. We know about the COPO Camaros and the Hemi Cudas, but before those legends ever turned a wheel, Chevrolet built a machine that was arguably more radical, more exclusive, and more significant to the history of drag racing.
Imagine a car so specialized that only 57 of them ever left the factory. A car that took the comfortable, stylish, full-sized American family sedan and turned it into a stripped-out, aluminum-paneled, high-compression monster capable of humiliating dedicated race cars. This isn't just a fast Impala. This is the story of the 1963 Chevrolet Impala RPO Z11, the car that proved that even a heavyweight boxer could dance if you gave it enough muscle and stripped away its soul.
To understand why the Z11 exists, we have to rewind the clock and look at the landscape of American performance in the late 1950s and early 1960s. This was the dawn of the win on Sunday, sell on Monday philosophy, but it was also an era of escalating warfare between Detroit's Dig 3. The National Hot Rod Association, or NHRA, was exploding in popularity, moving from organized street racing to sanctioned professional motorsport. At the same time, NASCAR was turning oval racing into a national religion. For Ford, Chrysler, and TM, these weren't just games. They were battlegrounds for market dominance.
In 1958, the Chevrolet Impala arrived on the scene. It was long, low, and wide, a masterpiece of mid-century design intended to ferry families across the interstate system in supreme comfort. Under the hood, Chevrolet introduced the W-Series engine, a V8 architecture that would become the grandfather of the big block Chevy. Initially, this engine displaced 348 cubic inches. It was a torque-heavy truck engine adapted for passenger car use, and while it was robust, it wasn't exactly a screaming race motor. The top-tier versions, labeled with evocative names like Turbo Thrust, produced anywhere from 250 to 280 horsepower.
It is important to pause here and clarify the terminology of the time. When you hear turbo thrust in 1958, do not be misled. There were no turbochargers involved. Forced induction was still a dark art reserved for aircraft and extremely niche engineering projects. These engines were naturally aspirated, breathing through triple two-barrel carburetors known as the tri-power setup. For the late 50s, this was adequate, but adequate has a very short shelf life in the automotive world. By the turn of the decade, the horsepower wars were heating up. The 348 cubic inch engine was pushed to its absolute limit, eventually churning out 350 horsepower by 1961. These cars were running the quarter mile in the low 14-second range at nearly 100 miles per hour. For context, that is faster than many performance cars from the 1990s. But while Chevy was patting itself on the back, the competition was sharpening its knives. 1961 brought the Supersport, or SS, package to the Impala lineup. Today, we associate SS with performance, but initially it was largely a cosmetic trim package featuring spinner hubcaps and dashboard grab handles. However, the real news was under the hood. Chevy bored and stroked the W-Series engine to create the legendary 409. This was the engine that would be immortalized in song by the Beach Boys. It was a cultural icon. With dual quad carburetors and high-flow heads, the 409 produced 409 horsepower,
1 horsepower per cubic inch, and eventually climbed to 425 horsepower by 1962. On the street, the 409 Impala was the king, but on the professional drag strip, the crown was slipping. The problem wasn't power, it was physics. The Impala was a luxury barge. It was heavy, structurally dense, and loaded with steel. Meanwhile, Plymouth and Dodge were rolling out the Max Wedge engines in smaller, lighter unibody cars. Pontiac was drilling holes in the frames of their Catalinas to create the famous Swiss cheese lightweights. Ford was stripping weight out of the Galaxy and preparing the 427 Thunderbolt.
Chevrolet engineers looked at the data and realized a hard truth. Their 409 was powerful, but it was pushing a boulder up a hill. If they wanted to stay competitive in the superstock classes, they couldn't just add more power. They had to change the fundamental nature of the car. They needed a weapon. This necessity birthed the regular production option Z11. This was not a car designed by marketing executives to look cool in a brochure. It was a skunkworks project designed by engineers to exploit every loophole in the NHRA rulebook. The objective was twofold: maximum horsepower and minimum weight. Let's start with the heart of the beast. The engineers took the 409 block and pushed it even further. By increasing the stroke, they punched the displacement out to 427 cubic inches. This was the first time the magic number 427 appeared in a Chevrolet production car, foreshadowing the legendary big blocks that would dominate the late 60s. But this wasn't just a bigger engine, it was a smarter one.
They installed a radical high-rise two-piece aluminum intake manifold. This design was towering, designed to straighten the airflow path into the cylinders. On top sat dual Carter 4-barrel carburetors for drag racing, or a massive single 4-barrel for NASCAR applications. Inside the engine, the compression ratio was cranked up to a stratospheric 13.5 to 1. To put that in perspective, a modern performance car usually runs around 10 to 1 or 11 to 1. A 13.5 to 1 compression ratio meant this engine was essentially a bomb waiting to go off if you fed it anything less than the highest octane race fuel. The official rating for this new 427 was 430 horsepower and an earth-shattering 575 pound-feet of torque. But anyone involved in racing knows that factory horsepower ratings in the 1960s were polite fiction. They were deflated to keep insurance agents calm and competitors guessing. In reality, a well-tuned Z11 engine was easily producing over 500 horsepower right out of the crate. However, the engine was only half the equation. The genius of the Z11 lay in its diet. Chevrolet put the Impala on a starvation regime that would make a modern race team jealous. They didn't just remove the spare tire, they systematically replaced heavy steel components with aluminum. The hood? Aluminum. The front fenders? Aluminum. The front and rear bumpers? Aluminum. Even the fan shroud and the brackets that held the bumper were made of lightweight alloy.
Inside the cabin, the purge continued. There was no sound deadening. Every pebble hitting the wheel well would ping like a gunshot. There was no radio, no heater. The front sway bar was removed because you don't need to turn corners on a drag strip, and removing it allowed the front end to lift easier, transferring weight to the rear tires for better traction. The result of this obsession was a weight loss of over 300 pounds. The Z11 tipped the scales at roughly 3,400 pounds. When you combine 3,400 pounds with 500 plus horsepower and 575 pound-feet of torque, you don't just get a fast car, you get a violent one. The power was routed through a Borg-Warner T10 4-speed manual transmission and sent to a bulletproof rear end equipped with 4.11 gears and posi traction. But speed cost money. In 1963, a base Impala cost about $2,700. Checking the box for the Z11 package added another $1,240 to the price tag. That's a nearly 50% markup for a car with no heater and no radio. In today's economy, that would be like buying a $40,000 Mustang and paying an extra $20,000 to have the interior ripped out.
out. But for the teams that bought them, it wasn't a purchase, it was an investment in winning. And when they did, the Z11 hit the tracks like a sledgehammer. Legends of the sport gravitated toward the car immediately. Men like Hayden Proffitt and the iconic Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins didn't just drive these cars, they weaponized them. Jenkins, famous for his cigar-chomping demeanor and engineering brilliance, piloted a Z11 nicknamed Old Reliable 4.
This sudden cancellation is what creates the mystique of the Z11. It is a what-if frozen in time. If GM had not pulled the plug, the 427 mystery motor would have likely evolved even further, potentially changing the trajectory of the muscle car wars of the mid-60s. Instead, the Z11 became an orphan. But what an orphan it was! Despite the lack of factory support, the privateers kept racing. They continued to campaign the cars through 1964, winning races and breaking hearts across the country. But eventually, technology marched on. The 427 Big Block would return later in the Corvette and Chevelle, but it would never again be packaged in quite the same raw, unfiltered way as it was in the Z11. Today, the 1963 Impala Z11 is considered one of the holy grails of American automotive collecting. Because they were race cars, many were destroyed, crashed, or cut up for parts over the decades. A surviving example with its original aluminum panels and matching numbers engine is virtually priceless. It represents a fleeting moment when the largest company in the world allowed its engineers to go completely rogue in the pursuit of speed. This car serves as the bridge between the era of the cruiser and the era of the muscle car. It took the grand Art Deco styling of the early 60s and injected it with the mechanical violence that would define the next decade. It proved that a full-size Chevy could launch hard enough to lift its front wheels and tear through the trap speed lights faster than a Ferrari of the same vintage.
The Z11 is more than just stats and part numbers. It is a testament to the golden age of drag racing, a time when you could walk into a dealership, check the right boxes, and drive out with a machine capable of setting national records. It is the ultimate sleeper, a wolf in aluminum clothing, and arguably the most significant Chevrolet that most people have never heard of. As we look back at the history of the Thunderbolt and now the Z11 Impala, the picture of the early 60s drag wars becomes clearer. It was a time of rapid innovation and fierce rivalry. But we want to know what you think. Was the Z11 the ultimate factory lightweight, or does that title belong to the Mopar Max Wedges or the Ford Thunderbolts? Let us know which legendary drag strip hero you want us to deep dive into next. If you enjoyed this journey into the high-octane past, please support the channel by liking this video and sharing it with your fellow gearheads. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss another chapter in our Rare Cars documentary series. Until next time, keep the rubber side down and the RPMs high.